Understood.
Um,
Okay.
yes, hello,
Great.
Tatiana. Is that one of your folks, Rabbi Joe?
Tatiana is one of my folks. Yeah. Hi, Tatiana. And,
would you come here?
Yeah. Oh, okay.
I feel like you're hanging.
why don't we, while we're waiting for everyone to come in, why don't we ask folks to please just quickly introduce themselves?
Yeah.
We'll start. Nancy and Harvey Goldstein. We live in Connecticut, but we have reason to be in Virginia, and so we belong to Yerushalmi.
Great.
We know the rabbi.
Okay.
I've heard something about that.
Okay.
And
Hi,
Mario
I'm Alec
Cantu.
Levy, and my wife Lucretia is the one who's muted, so that her sound is off since we're sitting next to each other, but we both have our own. So I'll let her introduce herself when I'm done.
Okay.
But we live in Manassas. We've our kids have been b'nai mitzvahs at the temple, and I don't know, we both work for the federal government.
Great.
Are those the critical facts?
They're facts. I'm not sure they're necessarily critical.
Okay. I'm just looking for one thing. Good. I, for some reason, did not pull up. Yeah. Okay.
Alan, do you know that we can hear you? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Who?
Ellen was just talking. But I don't, okay. Mario, you started before?
Sure. I'm Mario Cantu. I live in Woodbridge. I'm very happy to be here.
Great. Nice to meet you.
I'm Terry. I've been a member for a little over 25 years, but I had my bat mitzvah at Ner Shalom. I was a late bloomer.
My name is Myra Stevenson, and my mom was a longtime member of Ner Shalom.
Great. Great. So nice to meet you. Tatiana, you with us?
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
My name is Tatiana, and I am one of Rabbi Joe David's students. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I'm happy to join you today. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Happy to have
please keep yourself on your picture if you can.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Happy, is that one of your people?
Yeah. Happy is Ellen. I don't know if she usually doesn't turn her camera on, but hopefully she can hear us.
Okay.
Introduce herself. And Lamar. We're just introducing ourselves if you want to say hello.
Hello.
Huh? Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's start. And just with I want to start with just a couple of notes that if I'm in the middle of explaining something and you have a sudden urgent question, please write it down. And I promise there will be time for questions, or if I take a break and I finish something, you can either raise your hand physically or with a little yellow icon, and I will get back to you, I promise. And the other thing is I try to be very careful with this, but again, we're working in an area that not everyone is so familiar with or comfortable with. So if I use a word or a term or a phrase that you don't understand, that's really, please do stop me, because I absolutely want to explain it and make it clear to you. But if it can wait, also, if it can wait, just make a note. My name is Rabbi Joe David. I'm a native New Yorker, although I've traveled extensively around the world working with Jewish communities, and have worked in other parts of the country, most notably in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which for a Yankee like me was really quite an eye-opening experience. Most of my career, I've been a rabbi for over 35 years, over 30 years, has been focused on working with multi-faith groups. And I have, in the last 10 or 15 years, the very specific focus of that has been in teaching text, sacred text, to multi-faith groups. I have a Monday night adult sacred study group that has been meeting for 7 years. We meet every single Monday night with an occasional break, with a break for Christmas, and just for reasons of we can't all get together then. But we, other than that, except for an occasional Monday night that's a holiday where people aren't around, we meet every single night. As a result of that, we have been through the Torah completely twice. And this year we embarked on a word-by-word reading of the book of Genesis, beginning with the Abraham stories. We started in the fall around the high holidays, and we will hopefully finish by June. And it has been, so when I say word by word, that's exactly what I mean. We couldn't have done it when we first started, but by now, most of the group have been in from the very beginning. We picked up a couple of people along the way, but we're all now on the same page, so we understand what we're doing when we're looking at these texts. A couple of years ago, we decided to study the Synoptic Gospels. The Synoptic Gospels are the Gospels of Mark, Matthew, and Luke from the New Testament, because we have, I should make clear, this is an interfaith group. We have Jews, we have one Jewish member who actually has a very rich Jewish background. The others had never done this before. The person who has the rich Jewish background had done it in a very traditional Orthodox context, and initially would kind of figuratively stagger home and collapse, but is now very much with the program. And it turned out to be an extremely interesting experience to study these texts. My doctorate is in multi-faith engagement from a Christian seminary. And my thesis dealt with the intersection of the Last Supper and Passover. And so this area of what is shared, how do we understand each other, and what do our texts say to one another, is something very close to my heart, and has become very close to the hearts of the people with whom we study. Our learners are primarily working people, mostly working people who are still working, but are in their either late 60s to 90s. It's a very, very active, intellectually active, physically active. They ski. You know, I don't understand that, but they ski, and some of them, not all of them, but some of them, and they go for hikes and things. That's not me. Anyway, I like to be in front of my Zoom or studying some text, and those kinds, and writing. I'm a writer. I do a lot of writing, and of various. Oh, good, another non-skier. That to me seems like more fun than breaking your leg on a ski slope. So anyway, today we're going to look at why Jews should study the Book of Mark. So my first question is, has anybody ever read the Gospel of Mark? Good. Who said yes? Well, just raise your hand. Okay, good. So Myra and Marion. Good. So let me ask you, Myra, what do you think, just as an opening question, what the book of Mark, why the book of Mark is particularly important for Jews, would you say?
I'm not sure I'm the best one to answer that, but I would think because it follows Jesus's ministry, his adult ministry mostly. It doesn't start off like Matthew with the birth.
Okay, good, thank you. Mario, what do you think?
I blend them all together, Rabbi Joe. I know I've read the book of Mark. I just don't see anything outstanding about it. I thought that the link between Judaism in terms of scriptures, in terms of gospels, the most important link was the book of Luke. But you say
Okay.
it's Mark.
Well, it's marked for Jews.
Okay.
Marked for Jews. Yes, Alec.
So I've read parts of it a long time ago, not all of it.
Mhm.
But if I'm remembering it right, and I hope I've got the right gospel, there's a line in there when the Romans are marching Jesus to the hill, that they shoot away a young child or something to that effect, and that actually was Mark, so that even though he was a young child at the time, he was an eyewitness to the historical events.
Okay, good.
And would that be of relevance to why we should study him as opposed to the other gospels?
Okay, that's good, interesting thing to bring up, an interesting question. Other thoughts? Okay, so thank you. So here's the thing about studying texts. Jews should study all texts. But the way we should study, in my opinion, the way we should study texts is to forget everything that was ever told to us about the text. So, because if we carry all of that around, after all, just with Jewish texts by themselves, if we're going to deal with the Torah, especially with Exodus, with Leviticus, Exodus, and Numbers, which are the texts of greatest antiquity, there is so much baggage loaded on top of those texts and what they mean and what we're told they mean and what they could mean and what we never think about what they mean, that it's almost impossible to know what they say. Second of all, they're all in translation. Even if you were reading them in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, you would be reading it in translation because no one speaks biblical Hebrew. Nobody has spoken biblical Hebrew for 2,000 years, maybe. So even a native Hebrew speaker, I don't know if any of you know native Hebrew speakers, but when you give them, if you call someone up to the Torah and say, could you please read this section of the Torah, they look at you and they turn the other way. Because they can't just look at the Torah. Number one, they absolutely, unless they've been trained, can't learn from the Torah. They can't chant it. And they probably can't read it without the vowels, because biblical Hebrew is not modern Hebrew. And so they're as stuck as anybody else with what this means. So even if we could, the only way we can really know what the text means, the text that has been handed down to us and is so sacred to us, the only way we would know is if we could get in a time machine and go back and learn the language, and then we could figure it out. Then we'd be maybe 95% accurate, not even 100% accurate, maybe 95% accurate. And then add to that we would also have to acquire somewhere in this journey the entire cultural context of the period in which each of those books was written. For actually two things: the cultural context of what was going on when the events happened, those events that actually did happen, and what the cultural context was when they were written down. Those are two completely different things. So in a sense, one could say that there is absolutely not a chance at all that we will ever know what these texts mean. However, that doesn't mean that we can't get something that is of inestimable value from them. And that's because we have, along with these texts, the traditions of what they mean. The traditions of what they mean, the traditions of what the words say, of what the words mean, of how they're used. That's not something to be thrown away. It's a cultural artifact of immense value and interest, and offering the opportunity to go deeper and deeper into how we understand these texts. And it makes them just as valid. We're still reading the biblical text today because they speak to us. It's phenomenal. But we should never let ourselves think that what we read or what we think we're reading is 100% true and right. Unless you are a person who truly believes that the text was transmitted to us by God on Mount Sinai exactly as it is, and that continuing revelation will unfold it to us, which is a completely valid approach to text. It is not, however, a literary approach to text. And for me, I find the literary approach to text more rewarding and more helpful and interesting. And that's kind of the journey that I'm going to lead you on today. So let's talk about the book of Mark. Let's talk about a couple of things, actually, even before that. Let's talk about what we call Christian texts. We're talking about the New Testament. The New Testament did not just spring out of the earth like a miracle in all its glory. Like the Tanach, the Hebrew Bible, it is created in some ongoing process, probably beginning fairly early in the first century of the Common Era, by one or more people. And here's where those of you who have the idea of the text as holy and inviolable, I apologize. for possibly shaking a little bit or wiggling the foundation of that. But books are literature is a literary product of human beings. Even the church does not make the statement that the books of the New Testament are given by God. They accept that they're given, that they come to us through human intervention. Maybe divinely inspired, maybe not. Unlike the Torah, when the church becomes an institution and begins to craft its canon, its literary canon, there is an effort to validate the books. Makes sense, right? And it's the same way we do that today. Stephen Colbert. I don't know how many Stephen Colbert watchers there are, but say Stephen Colbert decides to write his autobiography, and it's going to come out and it's going to say, "My life as a talk show host by Stephen Colbert." And because he's Stephen Colbert and he's supposedly a man of words, it's not going to have a ghostwriter mentioned. But there is going to be a ghostwriter in the background who's been probably writing it for him, having occasional consultations, and who will get paid a lot of money for not having their name on the book, and the book is going to sell an enormous amount of copies, and everybody's going to say, "Oh, did you see Stephen Colbert is great, but he's such a great writer." Okay. The church did the same thing. The church said, "This book is written by this one. This book is written by this one." They try to affix the books to people who at the time, we're talking now maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th century of the Common Era, were people that names people knew. And because everybody wants to buy the name of the person they know, not the ghostwriter. No one knows the ghostwriter. That's why they're called ghosts. And it made them sell better, right? That's the way. That's publishing has always been and will always be that way. It doesn't make the books any less valid. It doesn't make the books any less important. Marketing is marketing and literature is literature, and never the twain. The twain may intersect, but they will never live very well. They will never lie very comfortably in bed together. So we don't know. We honestly do not know who wrote these books: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. No idea. The church has suggestions, or stronger than suggestions, about who wrote them, but the truth is not exactly sure. They're too far in antiquity, and nobody left the tell-all book. But that doesn't make them less important. We can, however, tell things about the books, and we do know certain things about the books. Like we know when they were written or when they were compiled. And it may have been that you had a combination of things happening, that you have somebody, Mark, the first of the 4 gospels. There are 4 gospels, right? There are the 3 synoptic gospels. Synoptic meaning that they're sharing material, and they more or less tell the same story, although the particulars are extremely important and very interesting to study. Those are the books in the order that they were written: Mark, Matthew, and Luke. Written, by the way, for 3 totally different audiences. And then the Gospel of John, which is the latest of the four, and which has a completely different agenda. Each of the books have an agenda. The agenda of Mark is to talk to Jews, who are reeling from the destruction of the Second Temple in the land of Israel. The Jewish community is devastated. The rabbinic community is trying to figure out what to do. And part of the community is saying it's time to take a sharp right turn and bring Judaism into the modern era, because this temple stuff with all the killing of the animals is so last millennium, and we need to move into the modern era. And the other half of the rabbinic community is saying, no. Don't you remember in 586, when the temple was destroyed, everyone thought, and everyone was exiled to Babylon, we hung together as a people, we built, and we waited, we built, we planned, and we got our temple rebuilt, and we should do that again. The reason we know that there's a very strong core of people, of rabbis who want to build the third temple, is because of the advent in 132 of the next war against Rome, the rebellion against Rome, under the banner of Bar Kokhba, Simeon ben Kosibar, whom Rabbi Akiva has named as the Messiah. And that in 3 years goes down to such a bloody defeat with the murder and martyrdom of 500,000 Jews, many of whom were rabbis and teachers, that Judaism never again until 1948 ever thought that they could have sovereignty in their own land. That's how devastating it is. The other outcome of Bar Kokhba rebellion was that the people who were the followers of Jesus, who up until that time were a sect of Judaism and meeting in synagogues, go over to the side of the Romans. John is part of that group, and his whole gospel is about telling any Jew who's still alive and listening that they were deluded in their pretensions of overthrowing the Romans, and that there's only one way for them to go forward, and that is to join the Christian rebellion, or the Christian alliance with Rome. That's what that gospel is about. That's who it's aimed at. However, the other part of what happens in the Bar Kokhba rebellion is that there is a split in the Jewish community between the followers of Jesus and everyone else. And it's at that point that Christianity takes its own road. And so if somebody ever comes to you and says, well, why didn't the Jews follow Jesus? All you have to say is Bar Kokhba rebellion, right? We're on different sides of a war. They chose the enemy, period, end of story. We have long memories over 2,000 years. We haven't forgiven them. They haven't gotten it. Okay, that's a very short summation of Jewish-Christian relations. It reminds me a little bit, in a very ironic and strange way, of the 2,000-year-old man. Mel Brooks, who is the 2,000-year-old man, and Carl Reiner asks him, did you ever meet Jesus? And Mel Brooks says, I made Jewish stars. This carpenter comes in and he shows me a new model. It's 2 sticks. They're like this, right? He said, I thought it was too simple. How did I know it was eloquent? Right? So, it's kind of, there comes a point in the development of Christianity where the Jewish worldview and the Christian worldview completely split. And later on, Jews will say and Christians will say, oh, it's because the coming of the Messiah and all of those things. It's not really that. They left us. They chose a different side. It's 2,000 years later, it's still painful. But which does not mean that they're bad people. Absolutely not. And it doesn't mean that we don't have anything to teach them and they don't have anything to teach us. But that's the background for the book of Mark. Mark is written around 70, 71, 72, maybe started in 69. We really don't know because no one left good notes that have come down to us. But we know that it comes out around that time, that it's meant for that Israelite, that Jewish community. We have no idea what language it was actually written in. The language that we have is Greek, but it might have been written in Aramaic. It's possible it was written in Hebrew. Depends on where Mark came from. We don't really know. Or the writer, whoever the writer is, the writer called Mark. It's like the entertainer called Prince. This is the writer called Mark, which might have been a group. It might have been he and a writing partner, he and a group of Jewish kids who were following Jesus. We really don't know, but anything is possible, and we shouldn't. I think to make an assumption for one or the other of several possibilities, not necessary, interesting to speculate, not really ultimately important to the text. The only thing about the text or one of the things about the text that's very interesting is, as for of the 3 gospels, it's the worst written. It's like somebody's sophomore high school essay, from a grammatical standpoint. It's clear when you read a good translation of Mark, it pops out at you. His grammatical struggles. It's clear whatever the text is that it was translated from, probably from Greek to English. I'm reading it in English. I wish one always says, I wish I could go back and do this and this and this. I wish I could go back and learn Greek and Latin. I would definitely, and Aramaic, really learn Aramaic, as opposed to rabbis' Aramaic, which is not so functional for text study. But it's clear that whatever language it was written in, that it's translated from into English, was not the writer's native language. It even is, as long as you get a good translation, and a good translation is not necessarily the most popular translation. I want to show you the book that I think is the best translation of the Gospels, and that is this one. Can you see it? It's written, the Robert Miller is the editor. This was given to me by a colleague of mine. It's yellow with age. It's marked up with age, but it has the most authentic translation. Most translations go for the best literary translation. It's a problem if you really care about words, because what you're getting in a good literary translation is somebody's idea of what the words say. And kind of like a corporate agreement, but not necessarily the most linguistically correct. So something to think about when you're studying text. You know, what am I actually reading? Anyway, it's likely that Mark, or the writer of Mark, was not a native speaker, probably of Greek. He was probably either an Aramaic or a Hebrew speaker, and it shows. The other thing that we can tell about him is that he knew Tanach. And we know he knew Tanach, as most Jews of the first century would know, who were literate, and that's not a big group. But anyone who's literate, that's what they would have been studying. He knows it because he quotes from it. He quotes from it liberally. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. The other thing that we know about him is that he knows Jewish law. It doesn't mean he's a rabbi. And I suspect from reading it that he wasn't a rabbi, because he doesn't approach the issues like a rabbi, even like Jesus does. But he knew. He was sufficiently well educated in Jewish, maybe not temple rituals, but religious norms. And we'll look at that in just a minute. You'll see what I mean. So he knew that community. He knew the people on the ground. He knew, he knew what was going on. He was part of that post-destruction community. It's like saying somebody like me. I was in New York in 2001 when the towers came down. That gives me a certain view of life that's very different from friends of mine who live in Philadelphia, for example. So during the same time, it informs the way we think about the world. He lived through that trauma, and it informs the way he thinks about many, many different things. So what's in the Gospel of Mark? Gospel of Mark is a very simple story about Jesus. Someone said it before, Jesus' ministry. Jesus' ministry and death. That's what it deals with. It's like there used to be that old TV show where the guy the cop would say, "Just the facts, man," right? That's what you get in Mark. You get pretty much just the facts. You don't get the baby story. You don't get the wise men. You don't get very much embellishment of anything. You get basically Jesus comes on the scene in Galilee. He's proclaimed by John the Baptist that he's coming. He comes. John the Baptist is a parallel, by the way, of Elijah, the prophet. John the Baptist is also a Jew, something we don't think about very much, but these are all Jews. these, you know, these are Jews. And so John, at the beginning of the book of Mark, announces that Jesus is coming. Jesus comes, he's there, he goes around, he does his thing. He gets caught up in this Passover thing because he's seen as a dangerous political radical, and he's crucified. He's put in the tomb. After Shabbat, they come, they open the tomb, no body. End of story. End of story. I mean, it's the most bare bones of stories about Jesus, and no resurrection. Interestingly, no resurrection. So here's a problem. You get Mark written around, say, 70 to 75 of the Common Era. You get Matthew, which has a birth story, has a resurrection story. It has lots of bells and whistles, but by the way, not the manger story. Yeah, it's when you read the three Gospels, somebody, it's like almost on every page, someone is saying, wait, where is this story? Wait, where is this story? And then you have to go and find it. Things are not what they seem. The church did a magnificent job of conflating the three Gospels into one narrative. And because people did not read, and then when people were literate, the church said, don't read, right? You weren't supposed to be reading the Bible. Therefore, they didn't have to worry about it. They just told their story. And it was a beautiful, simple story. Go to Rockefeller Center in New York City and see the Christmas show, and you'll see the whole story, and in its most magnificent conflation. But it's not a story that appears in its entirety in any one of the three Gospels. Let's see. I'm sorry, I lost my thread just a little bit, but I will get back there. So you have these stories. Well, you have Mark, the simple Mark. You have much more expanded and longer Matthew, which really sets up all the specific elements. And then you have Luke, which adds all the decorative elements and the mystical elements. So when the church decides to create its canon of the New Testament, it doesn't put Mark first. It hides it. It puts Mark second. It doesn't put it according to the historical order, because that's not what they're interested in. What they're interested in is telling the story, telling a very specific story. And so they insert Mark, and then they insert Matthew, and then they put in Mark, and they don't do much with Mark ever. And then they have Luke. So that's how you get this order of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew is written around 85 of the Common Era. Luke's written around 100 of the Common Era, but it's written for Matthew and Mark are for people living in the land of Israel. Luke is written for heathens in the diaspora, and John is written for everybody who lost their way everywhere, who obviously aren't thinking right, and he will tell them exactly what to do. By the way, just just to share with a little something with you. The opening of the book of John, the Gospel of John, is one of the most beautiful openings in literature. It says, in the beginning was the Word. And I just love that, right? Because it's such a parallel. What he's trying to do is recreate the Hebrew Bible in a Christian context. And he does it, because certainly no Jew could hear that and not think Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning as God was creating, right? And what it does is it links this fabulous concept of creation to speech. And of course, the Genesis goes on to talk that God spoke and the word came to be. Right? In the beginning was the word. John just steals it. He appropriates this in the most magnificent, stirring way that I think has ever been done in Western sacred literature. And it's just worth noting, that this too, very often when I talk about Christian texts, someone will invariably ask me, well, aren't there all these anti-Semitic things, don't they say? And John especially is awful. So how can we even talk about it? It's this, it's that. And I say, there's a lot. There's a lot to appreciate. Appreciating what is good is a very positive thing. Appreciating things that are not ours, so to speak, or that seek to meld what is ours and what is something else to make a bigger whole, that is a work of the creative spirit, or the sacred literary spirit, is something to be valued. It doesn't have to be, not everything has to be labeled and judged and put either in one canopy, one box or another box. We when we appreciate those things which are which belong to others, we validate them as human beings. We want them to validate us as human beings. We have to be able to free ourselves to do that too. So, and if we don't, we rob ourselves of things that are valuable and beautiful and could add a very special quality to our lives. So I thought we would let me stop for a minute, not for long questions, but for short questions. Is anyone who has a question they would like to ask before we go into some text study?
I'd like to ask something, Rabbi David.
Sure. Yes.
How did Jesus gain such popularity? There are dozens of gospels. You're talking about 4.
Right.
There's even a gospel of Mary Magdalene, for God's sake.
Right.
And how did Jesus gain such popularity?
It's great question. We have to understand what Jesus was. Jesus was a rabbi who he was a reforming rabbi. Now, don't want to call him a reform rabbi because that suggests something very specific. But he was a rabbi who understood, in the way that even today, or throughout history, we've seen rabbis and leaders of the Jewish community with a different point of view that had the power to change the world. Theodor Herzl, I have a dream, right? And out comes the state of Israel. Jesus understood that the system that was established in Jerusalem was antiquated in the extreme. Nobody was celebrating the kind of sacrificial system that the Jews had had in place for almost 900 years. 900 years is a long time to be doing shish kebab. And nobody else was doing it. They were putting people to death, they were slaughtering animals, but they were making some sacrifices, but the extent of the ritualization and the pomp and circumstance and the money associated with keeping the temple going and the drain on the Jewish community, it just, in the modern era, it was not functional or tenable or believable. Nobody, I think if you had gotten some of the great rabbis of the time together in a quiet room where no one could hear them and said to them, we have an opportunity. We have an opportunity to stop this already or to continue it for the foreseeable future. Where would you like to go with this? They would have said enough already. I truly believe that. It was no longer, they wouldn't have talked about spirituality, but it was no longer functional in terms of a worship rubric in those times. It's, you know what it's like? It's like if the Vatican, for all the millennia that all the centuries that the Vatican has been in operation, if the Vatican, when it was founded, had animal sacrifice to this day, can you imagine that? What they would have been picketed every single day by PETA, right? The animal welfare people. And they would have been picketed by the vegetarians. And they would have been, the Rome would have been, the Rome City Council would have been down on their neck for the pollution of the air with all the burning of the carcasses and it would have been untenable. That's kind of what it was like. And it was a big problem. Of course, you do not go and say, yeah, we're going to dismantle the temple. That you can't do too. But in a way, I won't say that the Romans did us a favor, but the rabbis were ready to move forward after at least half of many of the rabbis were ready to move forward with an alternative way of understanding Judaism when the temple was destroyed. And we know that because they had all these systems in place. They'd had them in place for a couple hundred years to have community worship and community rituals based on the temple. And we have that today. I mean, Orthodox temples today still read as part of their morning liturgy the sacrifices that would be made in the temple if the temple was standing. Well, that's fine. Not if you're saying we would have brought 6 lambs and 4 doves, at least you can also say at the bottom of the prayer book, no animals were injured in the offering of the sacrifice. But that's really, I think, what Jesus saw, that Judaism could be something different, something more, something that would free people of what he understood as burdens. And he did it. Jesus was, I think in some ways, similar to people like the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who had a certain view, and some of the other great rabbis of our times, without going at these, I'm thinking about people, and unfortunately, some of the things that's going into my mind is, do I really want to talk about this one because of X? Do I really? But he's in this great model of rabbis who see a different way and have decided that they're going to leave the fold and offer something new. And that has been the richness of Judaism. That's why we're still around. However, you the other part of your question is how did this proliferate? He had there were people who understood around him, close to him, observing him. Thank you, Liz. That this was something. Johnny Carson used to have he used to have, not Johnny Carson, Dave, anyway, Tonight Show. Used to have something. Is this something? Is this nothing? There were people who understood this was something. This potentially was something really big. And they focused on promoting it, disseminating it, for all different reasons. And that's why he had probably the greatest marketing team in the history of the world. So that's basically why, and the time was right. Timing always has to be right. The time was right for their message, and they had the financial backing, and it worked for a lot of, and it was simpler than Judaism, frankly. You take away, what did they take away? The first two things they take away is circumcision and the food laws. Makes Judaism a lot easier. So, and you keep the idea of the disembodied God, but you also have, for the people who don't have such good imaginations, you have a physical representation of whatever, you have a physical representation of something, and that's like for another time, the something. Let us quickly take a look at, I want to make sure I have the right text. No, it's not there. Excuse me just a second. Let me get the right text. Just one moment. I'm going to bring up for you a text of Mark. This is the very beginning of Mark. Okay. Everybody see this? Gonna make it even a little bit bigger. Okay. So this is not it. I'm very sorry. I don't know why. Okay. Oh, I know why. Okay. This is in the first chapter of Mark, and the very beginning talks about Mark, about John the Baptist, as I said, and Jesus appearing. And now they're going to Capernaum, which, should you have a chance to go to Israel, is definitely worth a trip. It's fabulous. It's up on the Galilee. And when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Okay, so let's just look at this for a minute. What's the problem with this text? Anybody? I can't see let's see if I can see it.
The grammar is awful.
Well, we won't, let's not worry about too much about the grammar because it's in English and who knows what it was originally. Maybe it was okay, but there was something else. There's something in the idea of what we're reading. Think about this. Think about this from another point of view. The rabbi is on the bima on a Shabbat, on a Friday night or a Saturday morning in your community, and she's getting ready to do her sermon, and some other rabbi comes in and comes up on the bima and starts to teach. And what this rabbi is teaching is something nobody ever heard before. And the rabbi is saying, and this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is how it is. And that's how, and then that, and that's how that preacher is approaching the text, whatever the text is of the Torah, say, of the Parshat HaShavua. What would be wrong with that? What's the first thing that would be wrong with that?
Well, in theory, doesn't the rabbi, not this other person, have the authority? The rabbi shouldn't be considered just a teacher, but he or she is the rabbi.
Right.
That's the person who.
Right. The rabbi has the ownership, if you will, in quotes, of the pulpit. So unless somebody is invited up to give a guest lecture, and we have that, we've seen that, right? Where other rabbis come and teach at the, like me, at the behest of the home rabbi, or sometimes someone from another religion will come up and preach as part of an interfaith program, right? So we've seen that happen. We know that happens, but no one ever just to walk in and start teaching in general is completely inappropriate. But there's something even worse from the point of view of the Jewish audience here. And what do you think that might be? Yeah,
Is it
Myra?
because the law is made as secondary?
Excuse me?
Is it because the law is being made secondary?
How? Tell me what you mean by that.
Because Jesus is marked as someone who had authority, not as the teachers of the law understood they don't have the same authority.
You're on the right track. You're absolutely on the right track. Someone else, maybe? Okay, so here's the thing. When most of the time, when a rabbi speaks, they will tell you what they're basing their opinion on, especially if it's a dissenting opinion. Or they may say, one of the most common phrases that rabbis use all the time, especially in teaching, is my teacher of blessed memory, so-and-so, taught me that. Now, after taught me that might come a whole refutation of what they taught them, but you always refer to the tradition. Either the tradition presented through a specific teacher or through more a broader context. You might say, you know, the rabbis teach. That's very common because sometimes you can't just say it was Rabbi so-and-so in the year so-and-so, and sometimes it's not necessary. But, and also because in 3,500 years, we have a very rich teaching. And sometimes the teachings that come down to us that we base our teaching on, or our modern teaching, or other opinions on, are so intertwined that it's almost impossible to say so-and-so said. You know, unless there's a reason. If you're doing academic writing, very often you might give 6, 7, 8 different footnotes or endnotes about a particular statement that would trace the development of the idea. But that is how, that understanding that that's what rabbis do, that's how I would go further. I'd say that that's how Jews understand teaching and argumentation is fundamental. And what's so absolutely fantastic about this text is because we see it in action 2,000 years ago. You know, it's kind of like the thing about the Dead Sea Scrolls that was so fabulous is that we have these scrolls dating back a couple of thousand years, and they're exactly the same as the scrolls we have now. And so we know that our tradition is authentic. Well, here, Mark, in a sense, this little text in Mark is like a Dead Sea Scroll, in that it's the fly caught in amber, where we know at the very beginning that 2,000 years ago, rabbis taught based on the authority of other rabbis, of their teachers. And the thing that distinguishes Jesus, and this is why it's presented here, is that he rejected that tradition. That's seismic. That is a seismic difference in somebody coming on the scene saying, I'm Jewish, and then saying, but this whole traditional thing doesn't, he's not saying it doesn't matter. He just completely does away with it. You know, and it's astounding. It's astounding in what it suggests about how Jesus, or whoever this is, what their agenda is. The agenda of these gospels is crystal clear in the beginning of Mark. It's to take down the fundamental underpinnings of Jewish discussion and law and teaching, and replace it with something else. And now we're going to see what it gets replaced with. Okay, and so it follows, just then a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Now, this is so interesting because they talk, this guy, who is he? He's somebody sitting in the pews who is being set up by the writer to be the voice of challenge against what Jesus is doing. But he's going to be subverted. The writer doesn't let him say what he should say, which is, what do you want with us, Jesus? Have you come to destroy us? That's his objection. He's saying, why are you doing this? How could you subvert our ancient law of understanding what teaching is, what what proper decorum is, right? What he's saying is absolutely correct. But the writer subverts him by this editorial comment. The man in the synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit. That's an editorial comment to let us know that he's not that a wrong impulse is motivating him. The wrong impulse. And then what does he say? Then he says, he might have said, I know who you are, you're the destroyer, instead of which he says the opposite, the Holy One of God. Right? That wasn't what he was going to say. It's like Balaam, who's supposed to curse the Israelites camping in the valley, remember? And he looks over and he says he's supposed to curse the Israelites, and instead he says, Ma tovu oholecha Yaakov. How beautiful are your tents, O Jacob. This is that. This is like that story put in here, inserted. This is why I say that Mark, or the writer, he knew the Torah, because think about who your audience is. Your audience is Jews. If it hits us that this is like Balaam, it would have hit them the same way. This is the man who wants to say something bad about Jesus, but he can't. And in all, I'm going to, do we have time? Do we have time? Do we have like another 5 minutes, 10 minutes or so? Because I would like to just show you the second part of this. But this is, all of Mark, much of Matthew, and some of Luke follows this exact same template. Everything gets related by reference, not necessarily by direct quotation, although there's a lot of quoting from the Tanach, from the Hebrew Bible, but by reference, making reference to things everybody knows, but casting it as Jesus. So John the Baptist becomes Elijah. Jesus becomes Moses. Different people show up as Abraham, as the parallel. What the writers are trying to do is they're trying to give the people who are listening, their audience, enough points of reference that they will, because they're so familiar, they will come up with it on their own. And then therefore they will accept the new message. It's like saying the temple is gone, but we can still have Judaism. And now there are two different Judaisms on offer. Now there's the Judaism of the followers of Jesus, and there's going to be the Judaism of the not related to the temple Jews, where the altar becomes the table in the home, and prayer becomes the alternative for animal sacrifice. And which side are you going to be on? Where is your Judaism? Where is that going to be? It's extremely important to understand that these are both approaches to Judaism. Because all too often, when we study about Christianity, we study these texts especially the early texts, because of the brainwashing that we've had over 2,000 years under living in a Christian world, it's very easy to get into this default position of Christians bad, Jews good. It's us against them. But that isn't how it started. It started extremely different. It started very differently. And if we can understand that it started differently, maybe the present that we live in can become different, can become more harmonious. Let me just share with you this last part of this text to show you what the Christians want to do with this, the followers of Jesus. They're not Christians yet, the followers of Jesus. So then Jesus says, be quiet. And then he's addressing the evil spirit, the demon. Jesus has a lot to do with demons and evil spirits. That was very popular at that time, demonology. Demonology, even in Judaism, is extremely popular. For example, do you know why we braid a challah? Anyone know why we braid challah or braid girls' hair, for that example? It's an amulet. If there was the idea that if you braid things, demons can't get into it. So if you braid a little girl's hair, it keeps her safe. If you braid a loaf of challah, you keep demons, or everyone knows, right? In quotes, everyone knows that the demons are attracted to festivals. We have a festival every Friday night. We want to keep them away. So we have a braided bread to keep them away on Friday night, and we have a braided candle to keep them away on Saturday night. So to keep them so that they can't come into the new week. And there are all other kinds of, the 5 cups of wine on the Seder table. We have, the reason there was the discussion about 4 or 5 cups is because it was considered to be unlucky to drink 4 cups of wine at a time, or to drink in even numbers, like 2, 4, 6. So there was a whole group of rabbis who believed you should drink 5 because that was okay. That warded off the evil spirits. And so the Elijah's cup is on the table just in case the rabbis who decided on 4 cups were wrong, and the demons actually come and they see the 5 cups, they'll go away. And so there's so much of this in Judaism. Anyway, Jesus says, come out of him. The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a shriek. Doesn't say who shrieked, right? Whether the man shrieked or the demon shrieked, but it's very dramatic. And then the people were also amazed that they asked each other, what is this? A new teaching and with authority. So in other words, what they're saying is that this is a teacher who can teach on his own authority, right? It's very powerful. He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him. News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. So for followers of Jesus, the whole concept of that story is that Jesus is established as a rabbi who does not have to teach in the chain of tradition, that he is, because he's so powerful, he's a demon slayer, right? He's King George and the Dragon, if you will, being a little anachronistic. Because he has force over otherworldly forces. Therefore, he has the power to speak on his own authority. And he doesn't have to worry about the old rabbis and what they taught. And we can, because he's demonstrated to us his power, we can be comfortable in following his advice and his leadership because he's even more powerful than the old rabbis. That's what that story is about. That's at the very beginning of Mark. Of course, for the church, that's not the best story to start off with if you're starting off in the New Testament, because they don't want to be talking about the old rabbis and the new rabbis. They would rather be talking about the coming of the Messiah and the birth of the baby. You know, and that's why they hide this story between Matthew and Luke and don't talk about it very much. So questions?
Professor Ehrman, Bert Ehrman, says that has said that if there were logic in the scriptures, that the Acts of the Apostles would that the gospel would come first and then the Acts.
Yeah.
Why does he say that when Paul the apostle was the one that spread this notion of a savior and the Son of God and all this stuff?
Right, it's a great question. Great question. When an institution, we have to remember that the church becomes an institution, right? When it gets adopted as the official religion of Rome, that's the game changer. Now they have to have an official book, right? They have to have some kind of canon that they can point to for proof. And there are many different reasons why a book gets, or a group of books get put together in the way that they do. We don't really know. They didn't leave us their notebooks about why they organized it the way that they did. What we know is that over time, this became the agreed upon order, that it must have filled some very specific political purpose. You don't necessarily want something historical as in with the Gospels. What you want is you want people to turn page one, such as it being a little anachronistic, but basically you want them in your hands, the first sentence. And the first sentence is Jesus was, by this time people know the story, or lots of people know the story. So Jesus was born, the Messiah has come, something like that. And that's really probably why, although I'm sure there was church politics involved and everything else. Similarly, I will tell you something that I believe. I think the first Torah, the first volume of the Torah to be written was Leviticus. And that Genesis only gets added at the end, gets added maybe after Deuteronomy. So, and that's based on my understanding of how I've studied the books and the language and how they seem to go together. We don't know, it certainly makes sense to have a book that starts Genesis, Exodus, the way that we have it. It makes sense, but it may not actually have been how it was actually written. It makes sense, like James Michener in Hawaii, in the great book Hawaii, where he can't start his story until he explains how the world was formed. So some writers need to really go down, so to speak, to ground zero to get themselves, to get their book, their stories launched. And certainly the idea that you begin with a religious book with the formation of the world makes a lot of sense. For Christians, it makes a lot of sense since Jesus has become the main character that we introduce Jesus first. Jesus as Jesus within the narrative. If they're going to hear a story, you want them to hear, if they're only going to hear one, they need to hear the most complete one that falls into the approved narrative, whatever that is. Yeah, thank you. Other questions? No, nothing.
I'm gonna butt in again then.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. You have good questions.
Nobody else has questions. I have one. I have a question about, I don't even know if it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, but an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Isaac Asimov says that it's Talmud, and that it means not retribution.
You're breaking up.
Let me try it again.
Okay. Okay.
Is the adage, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, is that restitution or retribution?
Great question. An eye for an eye, for a tooth goes back to the Code of Hammurabi, which predates the Israelites by a good 800 to 1,000 years. It's an ancient Near Eastern concept that is based on the idea of both restitution and retribution. And I think probably the way in which it might have been interpreted very much determined where you were and who you were around. In the Torah, where we have a lot of this discussion, even though they might not refer to it quite that way, we have a lot of laws in the Torah that say, if a man damages your ox, right, then you shall do X, Y, and Z. The Torah favors restitution. There are very few, I can't think of any things, although, I'm just quickly going through my files, my mental files. I can't, I can. Where you have retribution has to do with the concept of blood guilt. You and someone else have a fight, you push him, he falls, he knocks his head, he dies. His family will go after you to kill you. That's restitution. That's called blood guilt. It's a concept that still is alive in the Middle East, by the way. The Israelites dealt with it by, when they got into Canaan, they built 11 cities of refuge. If you were in that situation, and it only is for involuntary manslaughter. If you were in that situation, you could run to one of these places, you would live there for the rest of your natural life, but it wasn't a jail. But anyone who was there could not be pursued by the family seeking retribution. So it's kind of like all law. It's complicated. How exactly that worked, if it worked, well, we do know it must have worked in some way, because we don't have stories of people having blood feuds in Judaism as a normal kinds of thing. The closest we have to that is the story of Dinah in the book of Genesis, where supposedly, and I say supposedly because we've been really digging deep in the story, and the story is perhaps not what it seems, but Dinah may have been raped or may not have been raped by a young man who may have caught her fancy possibly during a fertility rite, of which the Israelites didn't normally participate. And the father of the young man, comes to Jacob's family and says, my son would like to marry your daughter. And they say, fine, but all of our people have to be circumcised. And if you let us, we will circumcise everybody in your family and in your whole area, your whole town. And then you can marry her. And they say, fine. And then so everybody gets circumcised, and then her brothers merrily go through the town and kill all the men and enslave the women and take the stuff. It's a really awful story. And it's framed, if you just read the simple story without questions, without looking at it, it's a retribution story. It's not actually that, but that's what it's supposed to seem like. It's like, don't look too carefully underneath the covers of that story. But that's what that seems to be. But that's the only one in the Torah, or actually in the Tanakh that I can think of. There may be another, but I can't think of any others. Other thoughts, questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
There's a couple things in the chat. I'm not sure if you saw those. So you can answer mine later. But I just want to point that out. There's a couple things in the chat, and has comments and questions.
Right. Okay. It's hard, when I'm trying to present and talk to people, it's hard to read the chat also. So let me see. Lamar, okay, the true authorship of the New Testament, that's interesting. Maybe yes, maybe no. I have yet to find anything that convinces me, which doesn't mean that I'm right, but that convinces me that there is one author. I think it's more likely for the New Testament that there are multiple authors over a number of centuries. I would like to introduce everybody to this amazing book. This is the Jewish Annotated New Testament. It's in now its second edition. It's the editors are Dr. Amy Jill Levine, who, if you have not made her acquaintance, is really extraordinary, and Mark Zvi Bretler, also great scholar of the New Testament. Amy Jill Levine, anybody know her? Have heard of her? Amy Jill Levine is an Orthodox Jewish scholar who studies, has made her work a life's work, the study of the New Testament. She also she's also a dab hand at the Hebrew Bible. And she's been teaching for many years at Vanderbilt University. I think she just retired recently, but she is one of the very few, I would say not even a handful, of Jewish scholars who have in the last 3 decades taken on the serious academic study of the New Testament from a Jewish perspective. This is a wonderful book with lots of very good but easy to read notes. It's big, you can see it. And I recommend it for anybody who has an interest in New Testament, because this really presents this from not from a scholarly Jewish perspective, as opposed to a religious Christian perspective. And it's important in the 21st century, we should be reading these texts. We should be studying these texts. We should have, as a congregational rabbi, one of the questions that I was always asked by religious school kids, usually third graders, was, did the Jews kill Jesus? Okay. And then you have, it's very hard to, because kids hear things. I remember myself in first grade, I had a little friend. I grew up in Brooklyn in a Jewish enclave, and I had a friend who was Catholic. And one day she came home for lunch with me and she said, I can't have lunch with you anymore and I can't be your friend anymore. I said, why not? And she said, because you killed baby Jesus. Really? And I was devastated. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I was losing my friend. And obviously, since I'm telling you this many, many years later, I never forgot it. It was so, and that kind of inbred kind of prejudice and misinformation that we spread to young children is a cancer in society, in the world. And unfortunately, once you, as all of you know, though, especially those of you who have children or work with young people in any way, once kids get things in their mind, it's very hard to get it out. I think in religious schools we should have ongoing, good, proper information about Judaism and Christianity and the differences and the similarities and caring about one another and the things that make us all human. I would love that. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Yes, somebody said, Lamar, thank you. Lamar talks about the Gospel of Mark showing incredible knowledge of scripture emerging in today's Pharisees. Okay, so there are no Pharisees today. Pharisees do not exist. Despite the fact that as a seminarian, I went to a seminarians interactions program at Princeton, and I got off the bus and someone greeting me said, I'm so happy I've never met a Pharisee before. The term Pharisee is a word that was of limited use in the Jewish world. It's used as a code word in the New Testament for the word Jew. A Pharisee is not a Jew. A Pharisee was a follower of a type of rabbinic Judaism, early rabbinic Judaism, that believed in a liberal interpretation of the Hebrew scriptures. The Sadducees were upper class Jews, wealthy, they were like the Jewish Republicans, who were focused on the temple and the temple rituals because that's where the money was. That's what Pharisees and Sadducees are, and they ceased to exist basically when the temple was destroyed in 70 of the Common Era, and the Pharisees won. Basically, the Pharisees become the leaders, the architects of rabbinic Judaism, which is what we all follow today, pretty much, unless we are Samaritans or something like that, you know. But since there are very, very few, most Jews today are followers of rabbinic Judaism, not Pharisees. Okay, let's see. Where are all right, so you ask a question, where are the prophets and prophetesses in the chosen people today? Okay, so that could be a discussion of hours for another time, but let me just say very quickly that the concept chosen people is extremely loaded. Very few Jews today use that term for themselves. It tends to be a term that Christians use for people, for the Jewish community, which has anti-Semitic overtones. And for so many difficult reasons and complicated reasons. And so in general, the concept of chosenness is something we could go into, but it would take hours to really unpack it. The only thing I will tell you is this. There's a story about the giving of the Torah, and it's a Midrash. And the story goes that God went to all of the people of the ancient Near East, and God offered them the Torah. He offered it to the Edomites, the Ammonites, the Phoenicians, and each of them said, what's in it? And God would say, it's such and such. And they would say, well, we can't accept it because of this. You know, we can't meet this criteria or that criteria. And God continues to go around the ancient Near East. And finally, he gets to the Jews after talking to about 10 different groups. And he says, this is the Torah. That's it. Take it. That's how we got chosen. We were the last on the list, and we didn't have a choice. So, and I think that kind of, I love that Midrash. It's a very old Midrash. It's, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years old. But I love it because I think it reflects how Jews feel about chosenness. You know, it wasn't something so great that came in a big bow. It carries with it, the relationship with God carries with it a lot of baggage. And sometimes the baggage is not so easy to deal with. Happy asked, do Jews for Jesus favor one book in the New Testament? You know, it's interesting you asked that. I don't know the answer to that question. However, my experience with Jews for Jesus is that they don't encourage reading or discussion of text. They may present you with a text, with a saying, as in, did you know that you're not a completed Jew unless you give your life to Jesus, that kind of thing. But they're generally not known for their text study, unless it's heavily guided and very expurgated. Thank you. And Happy says she has a similar story from her childhood. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Anything else? Well, thank you so much for inviting me into your homes, and I so much enjoyed being with you. I'm looking forward. I know it's recorded. I'm looking forward to seeing the recording, seeing what I said, and I invite anybody. Your rabbi has my email. Actually, let me put it in the chat. Let's see. As I mentioned, I do teach a course on Monday nights. If you are interested, I'm also starting a new course I work with converts, and I'm starting a new Bible course that's going to be a little bit different, kind of an introduction to Torah. If you're interested, please feel free to drop me a note if you're interested or would like to be on my email list. I occasionally send out little things for the holidays or the thoughts and things that I see. And maybe after COVID, I can come and see you in person, which I would love to do. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time and your attention. And I wish you all a good day and good health. Keep yourselves. Oh, hi, Rabbi Liz. Do you have anything, Rabbi, that you would like to say before I go?
No, I just hopped back in from our other thing that we had going on it too, but it sounds, just looking at the chat, it sounds like you guys had a great conversation, and I can't wait to watch that part of the recording that I missed.
Thank you. I would love to have a copy of the recording.
Yeah, for sure.
When you can. And also, I also invited anybody who would like to email me or is interested in my teaching to drop me a note. So thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I so much enjoyed it.
Can you put your email up again, please?
Yes, let me do it. It's Rabbi Joe at jaf18.org. Very simple. RABBIJO at JAF as in Frank 18.org. And thank you for my friends who are here also, who are hanging out, Jim and Tatiana. So great to have you.
Thank you so much for
teaching
today.
Thank you so much. Take care. I enjoyed being with you. Bye-bye.